I approached 150 women in 30 days, and I surprisingly discovered 4 unforeseen lessons that I want to share with you guys. Each stage of the 30-day journey had its own unique pitfalls, traps, so I want to take you guys through the timeline week by week and share with you the surprising results of what actually happened. However, a lot of dudes ask me, Kyle, is it actually worth it to go out and approach women and to study cold approach? And a lot of dudes think it's not that effective. So I actually went out 30 days in a row doing 150 interactions, and I broke down all the different analytics, and I want to share with you guys the results so you can make a decision for yourself. So let's get into the very beginning of the timeline, which is the first couple days of week 1 going into this thing. For those of you that don't know, I had been living my entire life in New York, New Jersey area. I moved to Miami earlier this year, and I made a decision I was going to start going out every single day and filming and documenting the entire process. So when I first started going out, I'm not gonna lie guys, I did feel a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of anxiety going into starting to film this thing every single day. And I had already been very well versed in pickup and cold approach. I've been doing this for years on end, but it was different. Now I'm in this new environment. I had my cameraman with me. We were gonna be going out filming every single day. And so it was something that I wasn't really used to, honestly. And so for the first couple of days of us actually going out and filming, earlier on in the day, I would notice that I had this like anxiety knowing that I was gonna have to go out for that 30 to 60 minutes and actually go out, do those approaches and film the entire thing. It was like this uncomfortable chore I had like hanging over my head that I was gonna have to commit to. But then the interesting part of it all was that once I started going out and actually making the approaches itself, it wasn't the approach that was that uncomfortable. It was more like there was just this anxiety leading up to the whole event.
What do you think? Would I like her?
Probably not.
All right. Yeah, let's just do it really quick. Actually, one thing I do want to say though.
So I can relate to a lot of you dudes. If you know you're gonna have to go out for the weekend, or if you're going out to finally make those approaches, you probably have a lot of tense nervousness energy inside of you knowing that you're gonna have to go do this thing. But I promise you guys, like the moment you actually start going out and taking the actions, the anxiety will start to relieve itself just off of the fact that you're doing the actions.
I was just gonna say, I was walking by. I thought you looked very cute. Take care, okay? Oh no, she has a boyfriend. But it's all good. Okay, I see one more. Let's do one more right there.
By the first day, the moment I started approaching, it got a little bit better. By day 2, day 3, I was in a much better headspace. It still felt a little uncomfortable leading up to the event, but it was starting to get easier and easier. And by day 3, I was getting a little bit more confident with it. And just to give you guys a little bit of data, for those of you that are curious about what the results were looking like, at the end of the 3rd day, I was getting into a couple longer interactions, but I didn't actually get any phone numbers or dates out of the first 3 days of approaching. It was more like shaking off the rust, getting over those initial nerves, and just getting into longer interactions. And as I progressed later on into the end of the first week, I noticed I was getting a lot more comfortable in conversation, in making the initial approach. I was going up a lot more confident. And as a result of that, the sets were hooking stronger and there was a lot more attraction on the front end of the interactions. And I think on day 5 and day 7, I ran 2 really long interactions, both of which were 30+ minutes long. They both ended up in Insta dates, and the second of which ended up being a follow-up date in week 2 of this 30-day process. So the main takeaway for week number 1 is understand if you're new to this thing, if you're starting a new action, it's gonna be uncomfortable in the beginning. There's gonna be anxiety, there's gonna be nervousness. You're probably not gonna be that good, and that's okay. We're committed to a longer journey in this thing. And with the consistency, it's gonna get easier and easier, and you'll become more confident as you get desensitized to that situation. And also, to be honest, by the end of the week, I did walk away with a handful of like flaky numbers, half of which was mainly just because I didn't really connect with the girl, or I wasn't that attracted to some of these women. I was kind of just going up, making the approaches, but I did really connect with 2 different girls, and those were those longer Insta dates. One of which she was actually leaving because she was a flight attendant who was just here for a couple of days. The other of which we ended up having a follow-up date in week 2. Now that brings me into the second week of this journey, because in week 1, I started to realize I was getting some of these numbers that were just kind of flaky, or I wasn't that crazy about the girl, girl, or I was just kind of like running through a relatively quick interaction just to get the approaches in. And by week 2, once the nerves were fully gone at that point and I was feeling a lot more confident in the sets, I started to really go for it a lot more. And that's when I made the decision that any interaction I get into that seems like it's going well, I'm just gonna stick in it. I'm not gonna try to go for the number. If the girl's free, I'm gonna try to actually go for an interaction right now. There's a lot of dudes that I see online that even comment on my own infield videos on this channel. They say things like, Kyle talks way too much. I would have been had the number. I would have been dipped out of this thing. This guy's ranting for like 10 minutes long. And there's a reason behind that, because getting a number after 1, 2, 3 minutes of interaction is not a solid number. All right, this was something I realized as I was going through this process, is that you think that you're running a good 1, 2, 3 minute interaction. There's somewhat of a vibe there, but the girl isn't really that sold. It's gonna be on you to carry the conversation much longer. Anybody that tells you just go for the number, she's either about it or she's not, they just don't understand how sales and influence actually works. You see, women are more like a volume knob, and it takes time to really build up the vibe in an interaction so she could genuinely be intrigued by you. You have enough time to display confidence in the conversation. You also have time to create somewhat of a connection with the girl, and then also to set up a date. A lot of dudes, they run a 1 minute interaction, they get a quick phone number, there was no connection, there was no date set up, there was no plans to even meet up with the girl again, and then you go home with this number and you're wondering, how do you text the girl? And she sends back one text, and then the conversation just kind of goes to shit. It's because you didn't actually run a solid interaction. And honestly, guys, I already knew a lot of these concepts before I went on this 30-day journey, but it's been a little while. Like, I was in a relationship, I was living in New Jersey, I wasn't doing day game that much, so it was kind of refreshing to go back into these habits and relearn a lot of these skills. And that's exactly what happened. By week 2, I found myself consistently extending interactions beyond the 5 to 10 minute mark. Even with the girls that I wasn't crazy about, I just found myself hitting the check boxes a lot better and being able to carry longer interactions. And just to show you guys what happened in week 2, there was 2 new girls that I ended up having longer date-like interactions with, one of which ended up actually coming back home with me that night. The other of which was a long Insta date where we ended up going for a coffee and hanging out for over an hour. And like I said, one of the girls from the previous week ended up coming back out with me. She had sushi over by my apartment, and then we hung out back at my house later on that night. Now, by the time I moved into week 3, I noticed I really had a lot of momentum going at this point. Like, I felt like I was on a completely different level. From day 0 all the way up to like day 14, 15, 16, I found myself in high levels of momentum now. I even found myself going out of my way to actually approach and open girls even when I wasn't in that time blocked session of me filming. I found myself on my morning walk, or even like later on in the night when there was an opportunity, I just kind of went out of my way to open the girl because I was in such a flow from just doing the thing 15, 16, 17 days in a row at this point. So the anxiety was pretty much gone by then, and I was actually going out of my way to consistently approach. And week 3 is when I really started going on Insta dates consistently.
I feel like I'm planning going to Brickell City Center.
You're going there right now?
I remember there was a 3-day period. It was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And keep in mind, we're talking about approaching give or take 5 girls a day. I wasn't putting that much time into this thing. I was literally going out somewhere between 45 to 60 minutes per day to do these interactions, right? But I remember Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I got in back to back to back longer interactions with girls that I was legitimately attracted to, and all 3 of them ended up hanging out with me later on in that week. So the Tuesday girl ended up hanging out with me on Thursday, the Wednesday girl ended up hanging out with me on Friday, and then the Friday girl ended up hanging out with me on Sunday. That was one of the first times I've had consistent back to back to back dates off of day game with girls who also hung out with me that week. Okay, that was actually the very first time I had done something like that. Because honestly, guys, I primarily grew up learning night game. I didn't really go out and hit daytime approaching that consistently, especially not in a major city. And this was the first week that I went back to back to back. And honestly, guys, by the end of the week, I'm not even gonna lie to you, it was getting to a point where it was like, I don't really wanna hang out with that many women. Like, it's actually, in my opinion, somewhat unproductive. And I think that's why after those 3 days, I didn't get any other new dates the other days, because like, going on 3 Insta dates and then hanging out with those 3 other women later on in the week, it is pretty time consuming. But one of the biggest takeaways that I learned about leading and bringing girls on dates is that I think a lot of dudes are very quick to try to push for the Insta date or the moment they start talking to the girl. Remember back to point number 2 about not getting a quick number? You also don't want to go for a quick Insta date. What I've noticed is that when I stop and approach these girls, I'm in the same position talking to them somewhere between 3 to 7 minutes before ever even suggesting to walk with them. Most dudes are very quick to try to push to go on the Insta date right away. From my experience, after doing this many days in a row and documenting the whole process, guys, you want to stand in the same position, build up the vibe. Take some time. There's no rush. You want to interact with the girl, build up a little bit of a connection, show her that you're a cool dude, not be so pushy, and then you can slowly start to maneuver the interaction to walk with her or to bring her with you to get a coffee, depending on how much time she has free. But week 3 was when I really dialed in the process of stopping the girl, extending the interaction 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes, then walking with her, running a 10 to 15 minute interaction, and back to back times that converted into a date the same week. And so if you don't have that many dates right now, if you're not making that many approaches, if you're trying to build up your confidence to get to a point where you could consistently replicate the process I'm talking about in this video, guys, click the button below, check out my brand new coaching program, links in the description, more details on that at the end of the video. But now let's get into the final part of this video, which is week 4. At this point, I'm already 21 plus days of doing this thing consistently. I have massive amounts of momentum going. There's very little anxiety. And I noticed that my mindset was actually starting to change a little bit in week 4 because I had just gone on 3 Insta dates and 3 follow-up dates with these women the week before. It was at a point where I was actually starting to get a little bit more selective about the girls I even wanted to hang out with later on. Like, I noticed that by week 4, after doing this so frequently, it was almost as if my standard was going up a little bit. Like when I first got to Miami, I was running around and doing all these approaches. I thought this was like a massive playground. As you do it more and more and more, and you realize it's actually kind of time consuming, and you've kind of gotten that initial euphoric high out of there, you'll realize that, like, honestly, you're not really that attracted to all of these women, but rather there's a smaller sample size of women that you actually connect with. And that's something that you won't truly realize until you fully get desensitized with going out, approaching women, going on dates, and interacting with a lot of women on a daily basis. Now, with that being said, I still did end up going up, interacting with a lot of different girls, but truth be told, there was definitely a handful of women on that last week that I probably wouldn't have approached if the camera wasn't actually on me and we weren't deliberately trying to hit this goal of like 5 girls a day every single day and get it all on camera. But in terms of practice and hitting the consistency and trying to build the skill set, I think it's important to actually push yourself and maybe even lower your criteria just for the sake of getting the reps in. And even on the last week, despite all of that going on, there was 2 women that I ended up having longer interactions with. One was nothing more than just kind of sitting down, having a coffee with her, and then it didn't really end up going anywhere. I concluded while on the Insta date with her that there just really wasn't that much of a vibe, and I wasn't really excited to want to hang out with her again. The other girl, though, we actually went straight to Pura Vida. We sat down, we had a green juice, and then she came right back to my apartment, which I thought was pretty surprising, which essentially means that in these first 30 days, there was 2 girls that I was able to go on an Insta date when brought right back to the apartment as well, and ended up closing. And one other thing that I didn't yet mention throughout this entire process was, even though I was in massive momentum, I found myself having high levels of confidence, especially towards the end of this thing, I was still getting rejected at some point on a daily basis. I don't think there was any day that went by where I didn't at least get 1 rejection. Or what's more common in Miami, honestly, is you go up to some of these women, they just don't even speak English at all. They're like, oh, no hablo, and then you end up just ejecting. Like, that actually happens maybe 20+% of the time out in this area.
Hi, can I just say really quickly? Speak into Spanish?
And so by the end of week 4, one of the biggest things I realized was just how important momentum is and staying consistent to a long-term timeline that you could commit to going into the journey. Do not go into this thing thinking that in the next 7, 14, 21 days, you're gonna become a god at this thing, or that you're gonna start to land your dream girl, or that even in a week or 2, you're gonna go out and become really good at this. This is a muscle that we're gonna have to put work in consistently to build up over time. You're gonna practice a certain concept, you're gonna go after it for about a week with consistency, and then by the next week, you could build off of that foundation. And week after week after week, we will continuously make progress. We'll focus on the positive actions, not the reactions. We're gonna stay focused on the actions to build this thing up, and that's how you could get to a really high level with it. So in conclusion, I do think if you live anywhere near somewhat of a major city and you have access to a populated area, you can 100% go out consistently without taking too much time out of your day. You could go out and make approach after approach after approach, work on the skill set, build your confidence up, get desensitized to approaching, rejection, putting yourself out there, and actually connect with some women that could lead to dates. Now, once you're actually going on dates, there's an entirely different process that you're gonna need to learn. So if you wanna get better at running first dates, you're gonna wanna check out this video here. Or if you're interested in actually working with me directly, whether that's one-on-one or inside my community, click the button down below, check out my brand new coaching program. That's all for this video, guys. Peace out.